Welcome to our new season of Empowered Women. I am sure you all have been waiting for our new season, our new episodes, and I'm your host, Priya Dhanda. And I can't wait to show you what we have in store for this season. We have some amazing women on our roster. It's great to have them on here. The women that you will see over the next few episodes are women that have attained so much and have broken all barriers within any community that's out there. It is amazing to see how these women have attained so much in so many ways. There are leaders that are strong and beautiful. For our first episode of Empowered Women, I have this amazing girl. She's a special guest. She has attained so much for her age of 25. I'm super excited to have her. She is the founder and CEO of South Asian Trailblazers, a media platform that showcases all these leaders in the South Asian community that have done such wonderful things. She has had great guests such as Medha Gargeya, right? Anjula Acharya, Anita Chatterjee, and Megha Desai. She is also a consultant to clients as a brand and media strategist. She has served as chief of staff to Indra Nooyi, the former chairman and CEO of PepsiCo. This wonderful guest is Simi Shah. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Priya, and for that very kind introduction.
Yeah, no, anytime. And I also want to tell you that she spends her time in the world of real estate development, financing, and with her hands in other spaces. She's a Harvard graduate with a BA in economics, and she is originally from Atlanta and spends her time there and in New York City. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Priya. Excited to be here.
I'm going to get right into it because I have so many questions for you, but I want to start off with, how does it feel to be a Southern gal in the Big Apple? Because I am one myself, because I'm from the South, but I live up here in the tri-state area and I love the Big Apple. So I know what it feels like. So I want to see how it is for you because you divide your time up.
Yeah, I love that question. You know what? I feel like I get to live the best of both worlds these days. I get to stay true to my Southern roots being here in Atlanta. I grew up in a very wholesome community, very tight-knit community. I drove everywhere, go to the same 4 or 5 local restaurants. And then New York City is sort of a different side of the coin for me. And I feel like emblematic almost of a different side of my personality. It's like the complete extrovert in me comes out. I love hustling and bustling. It's always like one thing to the next, so many friends and so many people to see. And so I really love it, and I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah, and I know that you went from Atlanta, you went to Harvard. So
Yes.
You've gotten the Boston feel and the Apple feel. So I think you've gotten to meet so many wonderful people in that. And I think that's why you are where you are now, because it's allowed you to meet so many different people.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think the communities that I've had the opportunity to partake in and step into, both in Boston, New York, and certainly growing up in Atlanta, have been huge contributors to what we've been able to build at South Asian Trailblazers thus far.
We mentioned your accomplishments from earlier. Can you, in your own words, talk a little bit about what you've done and where it began, and how did you end up creating South Asian Trailblazers?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, as you mentioned, I grew up in the Atlanta area. I grew up in a very robust South Asian community, attending Diwali festivals and cultural camps and all these things. And so I always had a very strong connection to my culture growing up. And then I maintained that connection in college. I ended up being president of our South Asian Association, captaining a Bhangra team. And then when I graduated, I suddenly realized that my ability to maintain that connection felt a lot more difficult in this new professional chapter of my life. There weren't student organizations or this community that my parents were bringing me into. And so I thought to myself, how do I continue to develop this connection I've had with my culture my entire life? And that was really the genesis of Trailblazers. The idea being that, can we create a space where generations of South Asians, but especially young professionals like myself, have the ability to access the stories of South Asian leaders across industries in a way that can inform and inspire our own journeys? And so, it started as a podcast. We've grown into a publication. We have social media content, live community events across the US and hopefully internationally at some point. But it's all really rooted in that lifelong passion for culture and the ability to have maintained it for so many years.
We come from a South Asian background. We're told to, go this traditional route. We're supposed to become doctors, whatever, the typical, saying in the South Asian
Yep.
community. We go from there. But when you look and where you are, you've achieved so much. How can you say your parents influenced your career decisions? And were they the typical Desi parents that just focused on education? Or did they ensure you had a balance in your life between education and what your passions were? And what drove you to where you are right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think growing up, my parents were always very supportive of my creative aspirations. I always tell people I was never the math and science kid, nor was I the language arts and social studies kid. I was kind of the math, language arts, and social studies kid, and they were always very encouraging of that because I think they had a lot of creative tendencies with themselves too, despite being, my father was a trained nuclear engineer. My mother pursued the sciences up through college, but that was because that was the way it was in India. You had to choose, and I think they've been very open and progressive since they immigrated here, saying there's so much out there. And as long as we encourage them, one, they're less likely to hide themselves from us. I feel like I can present the whole of myself to my parents at all times. I'm very close to them as a result. But I think they also felt that that would enable us to succeed in whatever we pursued. And so when I went to college, I actually I always had inclinations towards the world of business because I grew up in a very entrepreneurial family, but I very much stumbled into the world of finance through a program called Girls Who Invest.
Mhm.
Ended up graduating to work in private equity and spent, a little under a year there because I realized that it was really fascinating work, but it's not really what I saw myself doing over the longer arc of my career. And I said, if I don't see that now, what's the point of spending time continuing to do something?
So I think, with all of these shows that you're doing, talking to these people, it tells you that people, you could do it, you can make it, just go with it and don't have any fear.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that. Something else I've been noticing lately is how many of our guests are like, I didn't really have a 3-year plan. I didn't have a 5-year plan. I didn't
Yeah.
have a 10-year plan. And they'll always be like, maybe I shouldn't say that. Or I know that's not the conventional advice. And I think it's funny because so many of them have said that, they were really just pursuing their purpose. And there were, more than a number of times that they were scared and had this fear, as you're saying, but they just learned to overcome and were like just so led by this guiding gut and this instinct that they had that, yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with everything you're saying.
Yeah. And when you look at it and you're a woman, we have all these, great leaders out there or people in corporations. They're women right now. And we're trying to make a better mark in society. It's a constant struggle. We know that for a fact, right? And
Absolutely.
and when you look at that and you see, that the theme of the show is empowering women, right? So when you do that, how do you think we can empower women to attain whatever they want? And what is one piece of advice that you would love to give to them?
Oh, wow. I think in terms of how we empower women, this is a conversation again that I would have a lot in my role as chief of staff and just a lot of the work that I've done working, even as a brand strategist with a lot of female founders is um you sometimes if you can't get a seat at the table, you have to build your own table. And I know that can feel really daunting but I've definitely been in a lot of rooms where it's not about reinventing the wheel, right? It's about getting on a different boat, getting in a different car. And so I think we all need to think critically about how we create opportunities for women to do that. And I say that specifically in terms of who's listening to this right now, with respect to the fact that um, we as women, I think, sometimes feel like it can be a zero-sum game.
You mentioned earlier, women, in a space, they can talk to each other, they can discuss whatever, they walk into that room. I know, you know, we have to lift each other up. And I know just recently, you were at the Slashy Summit, right?
Yes.
So you were one of the panelists right there. And then, when you go back to it, it goes back to that fear. Don't put that into your own head, right? So I think the Slashy Summit is breaking that for us women, because it's predominantly, that's what I'm seeing, is that we're creating that space so that we don't have that fear that when we walk into a room, we're not in our own heads basically, and we're able to attain whatever. There's entrepreneurs, there's influencers, there's all sorts of people on different levels that it's brought them all. And it's great to see that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think and Brown Girl Mag has done such a phenomenal job in putting this summit together now for their fourth year. But I think it's exactly what you're saying, that when we exist in saturated spaces, it's really easier for us to feel like it's a zero-sum game. That if I get a piece of this pie, there's not going to be enough pie left. When in reality, we need to think, how do we grow the pie? How do we all come together and grow the pie, right? Like a rising tide lifts all ships.
Right.
And so I think the reality is, and I think people, and I've found this in my career, a lot of people have helped me, and I strive to pay that forward. And every time I do, I bear the fruits of that. I see more opportunities come my way. People, when you create opportunity for others, they want to come back to you and they want to give you more opportunities. And so I think we need to all think about how we can live together, rise together, and move together.
You're part of that. There are other women that are out there, and you guys are doing such an amazing amazing job with it all. And I think it's resonating with a lot of people out there. And I really love that. Is there any other advice that you have for anybody out there?
That's a great question. I guess while we're in this thread, I'll stay on it. Last year, we started our Dinner with Trailblazers series, where we gather specific South Asian leaders in specific industries to come together for an intimate dinner, to have conversations, forge those relationships that span not just the professional, but also the personal. And so we did a dinner for South Asian women in venture capital. And my big takeaway from that event was, candidly, like, men have been doing this for decades and generations. They have these informal sit downs, and that informal conversations turns into a formal partnership. And so as we had this dinner, I said, the goal for today is not just to make new friends. Like, of course, that's great, but it's also to make new business partners. Like, I hope you guys leave today and you guys share deal flow and you co-invest together. And when a deal crosses your desk that your venture firm can't do, you call up this friend that you met at this dinner, right? And again, it just goes again to this notion of community. But I think forging those relationships and pushing because we are, like, as women, we are phenomenal at forging relationships. Like, human connection is what we're best at fundamentally, right? We don't just have high IQ, we have high EQ. It's so innate to who we are and how we've evolved. And so I think it's thinking critically about, again, taking that personal element and translating it to the professional, which I think is something that we don't talk enough about. But again, I think a lot of men, I came from the world of finance. Men do this all the time. They're like, let's go get drinks after work. And then they have a conversation, and the next day they come into work and you're hearing them talk about some deal that they're working on or some new project you're working on. And women often get left out of that conversation because they're not invited. And I'm like, well, while we are creating these spaces, having these conversations, let's make more of that happen.
Yeah. And then speaking of projects or anything else, is there anything in the future that you have that you can speak about, or do we just have to stay tuned?
You can stay tuned. I mean, we're trying to do more events for the community, like I said, across industries, across spaces. We just did a live podcast with Anjula Acharya, the legendary investor and manager to Priyanka Chopra Jonas. We have an upcoming breakfast for South Asian founders in the CPG space. So I always encourage people to follow us in whatever capacity you like, whether, it's like you listen to the podcast on your morning run, or, subscribing to our newsletter, following us on socials. We have a lot of exciting things in the work, and we're always excited to collaborate and work with people and take people's ideas into consideration. So other than that, I'll say stay tuned, but lots of exciting things on the horizon.
Well, thank you for all of that. It was so good having you here on the show, and can't wait to have you back. It would be great. But I want to tell everybody, please check out Simi's podcast, South Asian Trailblazers. You will be truly entertained and informed at the same time, and inspired. And I want to say thank you for being here.
Priya, thank you so much for having me and for hosting this series. I mean, feel very lucky to, again, know women like you who, are using their voice and platforms to amplify other women and other people. So much love to you and much appreciated. Thanks for having me.
Thank you all for joining me for the first episode of this season. I can't wait to have you again, and can't wait to see what we have in store for you. Until next time, keep it going with a smile.